Rain does something to a diner at 1 in the morning. It turns the windows into mirrors, so everyone inside ends up watching themselves as much as they're watching each other. Olivia Adu had wiped down the same 6 feet of counter 3 times in the last 10 minutes. Not because it needed it, because the man in the corner booth had walked in 20 minutes earlier with 4 other men who never sat down, who stood by the door instead, watching the street the way men watch a street when someone is paying them to notice everything on it. 3 years behind a counter teaches you the difference between a customer and a warning. He hadn't looked at a menu. He hadn't said please. When she set his coffee down, he didn't say thank you either. He was still in a way that had nothing to do with being tired or being bored. It was the kind of still that made the cook in the back suddenly remember something urgent to do with the walk-in freezer. She should have let it go. Every instinct that had kept her employed and unbothered in this city for 3 years told her to let it go. She topped off his cup instead, because that was her job, and because some stubborn, unreasonable part of her had never once in her life let a man's silence tell her how to spend her evening. "You're hovering," he said, without looking up. "Refill the cup or find another table to bother. I don't have the patience tonight for whichever one you're about to pick." The diner went quiet the specific way a room goes quiet when 4 grown men who haven't moved in 20 minutes suddenly, almost invisibly, shift their weight. Olivia set the coffee pot down. Slowly. The way you set something down when you want a person to notice that your hands aren't shaking. "I dare you," she said, "to use words like that on me again and see the other side of me." Nobody in that diner breathed for 4 full seconds. A fork stopped halfway to somebody's mouth. Near the door, one of the men let his hand drift, just slightly, toward the inside of his jacket, out of a habit old enough that it didn't ask permission anymore. And Jean Choi, who had not been surprised by anything in 11 years, looked up at her like she was the first thing in that room that had ever actually been there. Hold that image for 1 second. Her, steady. Him, looking up. The whole diner caught in between one breath and the next. Before you find out what happens next, you should know exactly who she just said that to. If you're new here, welcome to Afro Korean Stories Empire. If that last moment pulled you in, hit subscribe now so you never miss another unforgettable story. Now let's go back, because you deserve to know exactly what kind of man just looked up at her. 3 hours before Jean Choi ever set foot in that diner, he was sitting behind a desk on the top floor of a building most people in the city knew as an investment firm, because that was easier for everyone than the truth. A man named Hoon sat across from him, turning a folder over in his hands like it might feel less heavy if he held it differently. "The numbers from the 8th Street collections are short," Hoon said. 6 weeks running now. I can explain it." Jean didn't tell him to stop talking. He never did. He found that people explained themselves more completely, more honestly, when they believed they were still being listened to. So Hoon explained. A supplier had raised prices. 2 of the shops on the block had gone quiet, stopped answering, and he hadn't wanted to push too hard on people already struggling. He meant to make it up this month. He swore he'd meant to make it up. Jean let him finish every word. "Thank you for telling me the truth," Jean said, and for one terrible, hopeful second, Hoon believed that might be the end of it. "Your brother's loan on the restaurant," Jean said, in the same gentle voice he'd used to thank him. "The one we hold. Call in by morning." All of it at once. The room was warm. Somewhere below them, traffic moved through the rain like nothing in the world was happening. Jean did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He picked his pen back up and returned to the papers in front of him, the way a man returns to a crossword after answering the phone. And Hoon understood, the way everyone eventually understood, that the conversation had already ended several sentences before he realized it. He did not remember standing up. He only remembered being in the hallway, and then in his car, and then sitting outside his brother's restaurant with the engine running, trying to figure out how he was going to say the words out loud. By the time his driver pulled the car around that night, Jean didn't want to go anywhere that required him to be anyone. Not the office. Not home, which had never really felt like one. He told his driver to just drive, and somewhere past midnight, in the rain, he saw a diner on 8th Street with its lights still on, and he told the driver to stop. Back in that diner, for seconds had passed, which does not sound like a long time until you have lived inside one. Jean looked at her, really looked, the way he looked at ledgers when the numbers didn't add up, searching for the thing that explained the whole picture. Then he did something none of his men had seen him do in longer than they could remember. He picked up his coffee, and he drank it. Not a performance. Not a warning. Just a man drinking coffee, as if a woman with nothing behind her but an apron and a stubborn jaw hadn't just spoken to him the way no one alive had spoken to him in 11 years. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It was there and gone so fast that Olivia would spend the rest of the week convinced she'd imagined it. He stood. He reached into his jacket and set far more money on the table than 4 cups of coffee and a slice of pie had ever cost anywhere in this city. And he said the only other thing he said to her that night: "Keep the change." Then he walked out, and his men followed him the way shadows follow a man who has never once had to check that they were still there, and the door swung shut behind him, and the diner exhaled all at once, like it had been holding its own breath along with everyone in it. Nadia appeared at Olivia's elbow, so fast she must have been holding it the whole time too. "Girl," she said, "do you know who that was?" Olivia did not. Not yet. Not the details, not the name that would mean something to half this city and nothing at all to her. What she knew was smaller and stranger than that. She knew that her hands, which she had been so careful to keep steady, were shaking now that it was over, and that some foolish, unguarded part of her chest was doing something uncomfortably close to disappointed that he was gone. "No," she said, "but I don't think he'll be back." She would be wrong about that within 48 hours. In the car, nobody spoke for 6 blocks. Gene sat with his elbow against the window, watching the diner shrink and disappear behind the rain on the back glass. And he did not examine, even privately, why he kept watching for as long as he did. "Sir," his driver said eventually, carefully. "Home." "Drive," Gene said, which was not an answer, and everyone in that car had worked for him long enough to know better than to ask a second time. Every driver who worked for the organization filed a short report at the end of shift. Were they gone? How long they'd stopped? It was a habit born less of suspicion than of care, the kind of quiet bookkeeping that had kept men alive for 2 decades. Most of these reports were never read by anyone at all. Dae-yoon read all of them. He found a line about 8th Street 2 days later, tucked between a stop for gas and a late return home. 20 minutes, it said. A diner. Gene did not stop places. Gene went from one destination to the next the way a blade goes from the sheath to the target, with nothing wasted in between. Dae-yoon did not mention it to anyone. He did not need to raise an alarm over 20 minutes and a cup of coffee. He simply remembered it, the way he remembered everything that did not match the pattern of man he had known since before that man could walk. The diner did not stop being a diner just because something strange had happened inside it. In the days that followed, Olivia was back behind the counter every morning at 6, pouring coffee for Mr. Adu, who tipped exactly $1 and one blessing every single day, rain or shine, and who liked to remind her that a good man was coming. He was simply taking his time, the way all good things did. "I don't think the last one counts as a candidate, Mr. Adu," she told him, and he laughed so hard he had to set his cup down. Nadia would not let it go. Who was he? What did he want? Was Olivia insane, certifiably medically insane for talking to a man like that the way she had? "I don't even know his name," Olivia said, which was true, and somehow felt like the least important true thing about that whole night. What she did know, and did not say out loud, was that she had spent 3 years in this city, keeping her voice small enough that nobody's family would ever again stand in a doorway and call her too much. And for 4 seconds, in front of a man who could apparently end a person's evening with 2 sentences, she had let it out anyway, and the sky had not fallen. She thought about that more than she thought about him. She would not have admitted, even to herself yet, that this was already a lie. Behind the counter, in the drawer where she kept her order pad, there was a notebook with a taped-up cover and her grandmother's handwriting inside it, jollof measured in handfuls instead of cups, and beside it, a coffee tin with $43 in it that had been $42 the day before. $43 and a whole life folded into a notebook. That was the actual story, she reminded herself. Not some man in an expensive coat. She almost believed it. 4 nights later, in a private dining room 2 floors above a restaurant that did not appear on any online menu, Gene Choi hosted a man named Danny for dinner. The room smelled like garlic and candle wax and nothing else, which was, in its own way, the whole point. They talked about nothing important through the first 2 courses. Danny's daughter, who was starting high school. A boat Danny wanted to buy. The rain, which had not let up in a week. Gene was an excellent host. He refilled Danny's glass before Danny noticed it was empty. He laughed, once, at something that wasn't especially funny, and Danny laughed with him, relieved, the way people are always relieved when a dangerous man seems for one evening, like he might simply be a man. It was only after the plates were cleared, once the coffee had been poured, that Gene set his cup down and asked the only question he had actually invited Danny there to ask. "Who did you talk to on Tuesday?" He did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward. He asked it the way he might have asked what time it was. Danny's hand found his own coffee cup and did not lift it. "I don't," Danny started, and then started again, and could not find a version of the sentence that ended anywhere good because there wasn't one, and some part of him had known that the moment the question was asked, the same way, one breath before you slip on ice, that you're already falling. Gene watched him for a long moment, the way he watched everything, without hurry, without heat, a man reading a ledger that had finally, after weeks of looking, balanced. Then he stood, straightened one cuff, and told the two men waiting by the door that Danny would be needing a ride home. Danny's chair was still warm when the second man came in to clear his plate. Nobody at that table ever saw him again, and nobody who worked for Gene Choi ever asked where he'd gone, because in that world, the not asking was its own kind of answer, and everyone already knew it. It became, over the following 2 weeks, a habit Gene did not admit to having. He told himself, the first time he went back, that it was simply the closest place open when he needed to think. The second time, that the coffee was against all odds genuinely good. By the fourth time, he had stopped bothering to invent a reason, and simply let his driver take him there the way you let your feet take you somewhere your mind hasn't agreed to yet. He never sat in the same booth twice. He never stayed longer than 40 minutes. He told himself these were precautions. They were not precautions. Precautions were not, as a rule, accompanied by the specific, unfamiliar lightness that moved through his chest every time the bell over the door rang, and he saw her look up. On a Sunday, during the slow hour between breakfast and lunch, Olivia called her mother in Kumasi, the way she did every week, sitting on an overturned bucket in the alley behind the diner because the signal was better out there than anywhere inside. "Mame," she said, "the notebook is almost full. I started a new page for the Kella wheel." Her mother wanted to know about money, about the tin, about whether Olivia was eating enough, sleeping enough, whether some man had finally had the good sense to notice her, because it had been long enough now, hadn't it, since the last one, and a woman couldn't wait forever for the world to deserve her. "Nobody's noticed me, Mame," Olivia said, and thought, unbidden, of a coffee cup being drained without a word of thanks, and of far too much money left under a saucer, and decided this was not something her mother needed to know about yet, possibly ever. They talked for 11 minutes, which was as long as either of them could usually afford, and when Olivia hung up, she sat on the bucket a moment longer in the cold, doing the math she did most weeks. $43 had become 61. 61 was still, by any honest accounting, a very long way from a restaurant. But it was hers. Every dollar of it had come from her own two hands, and nobody had told her she was too much to earn it. She went back inside before Nadia sent someone looking for her, and she did not tell Nadia, either, that some small and previously silent part of her had started listening for a bell over a door that hadn't rung yet that day. It happened on a Thursday, near the end of a double shift that had started at 6 that morning and showed no particular interest in ending. Olivia was carrying a full tray toward table 6 when her ankle caught the leg of an empty chair someone had left pulled out, and for one long, ugly second, gravity had very clear plans for her and everything on that tray. A hand closed around her elbow before she'd even finished falling. Jean didn't say anything. Neither did she. The tray steadied. The coffee cups rattled and settled. And for exactly 1 second longer than the moment strictly required, his hand stayed where it was, and hers stayed still enough to let it. Neither of them mentioned it. What was there to say? Thank you felt too small. Anything else felt too large. He went back to his booth. She went back to work. But when her shift finally ended, near midnight, she noticed that the plate she'd fixed for herself hours earlier, the one she'd never found 10 free minutes to eat, had disappeared from the end of the counter. In its place sat a to-go container she hadn't ordered, still warm, with a fork tucked neatly beside it. He was already gone by then. He always left before she could catch him at anything. She sat on the same overturned bucket where she called her mother, and she ate the food a dangerous man had apparently noticed she'd forgotten to eat, and she did not examine, not yet, not out loud, why her chest felt exactly the way it had the first time someone had said her name softly enough that it sounded like it belonged to somebody worth being gentle with. Small things collected after that, the way small things do, quietly, until one day there's simply too many of them to call an accident anymore. He remembered, without being told twice, that she took her coffee black except on nights she'd had a long shift, when she wanted it sweet enough to be dessert, and somehow he was never in the diner on the easy nights. She learned that he almost never smiled, and that when he did, just barely, just at the very corner of his mouth, it was usually because she'd said something he hadn't expected a person to be brave enough to say to him. One night, with the diner empty and the rain doing its usual work on the windows, she asked him point blank what he actually did for a living, the kind of question she had no business asking a man like him, and asked anyway because apparently that was who she had decided to be around him. He looked at her for a long moment. "Something you'd be smart to stay curious about from a distance," he said. It wasn't a threat. It came out almost gentle, almost like a warning meant to protect her rather than himself. "I've never once in my life been smart about staying at a distance from anything," she said. Something moved behind his eyes, there and gone, the same flicker she'd caught the first night, except this time she was starting to recognize it for what it actually was. Not danger. Want, badly disguised as caution. "Can I ask you to do something for me? Right here, before we go any further. If you're feeling what I think you're feeling right now, that specific ache of watching two people circle each other and wanting so badly for them to just stop circling already, then take a second and tap that subscribe button. Not for me. For every story like this, one's still waiting to find you. And if there is someone in your life who lives for exactly this kind of love, a sister, a best friend, someone who still believes, against all evidence, that the right person is worth the wait, send this to them right now. They will thank you for it later. While you're there, type, "I am loving it" in the comments, so I know you're still with me. I read every single one. Thank you for staying this long. What happens next is going to change how you see everything you've watched so far. The discovery, when it came, arrived the way most important discoveries do, sideways and by accident, while Olivia was thinking about something else entirely. Frank, who had owned the diner for 19 years and complained about the rent with the devoted regularity of a man reciting scripture, stopped complaining one Tuesday morning, and it took Olivia most of the day to notice the silence. "You didn't mention the rent today," she said, refilling his coffee, mostly out of habit. Frank looked at her strangely. "Rent hasn't gone up in 3 years," he said. "Same as every building on this block. You know that's not normal, right? Every other block around here got bought out, gutted, turned into something with exposed brick and $11 toast. This one didn't. Landlord won't even discuss selling. Nobody knows why." Olivia had never once thought to ask why. The diner had simply always been there, the way the sky was simply always there, a fact rather than a mystery. But she thought about it now, standing at the counter with the coffee pot going cold in her hand, and she thought about a man who had never once explained what he did for a living, who moved through this city like weather that other, smarter weather got out of the way of, who had started appearing in her diner with a frequency that had stopped, weeks ago now, feeling like coincidence. She thought about the two men who had walked in with him that very first night, standing by the door, watching the street the way men watch a street when someone is paying them to notice everything on it. Watching this street, this block. Maybe, she realized, with a chill that had nothing to do with the weather, watching it for longer than she had actually known him. It did not feel like an accident anymore, him walking through that door on a random rainy Tuesday. It felt for the first time like something that had already been decided, quietly, patiently, long before he'd ever said a single cutting word to her, and long before she had ever dared him to say another one. Every proximity she had assumed was chance rearranged itself, in the space of one held breath, into something that looked a great deal more like choice. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a memory surfaced without permission, a rumor Nadia had once repeated about a lieutenant whose brother's restaurant had gone under overnight, 6 weeks of missing money on some blocks near here, and Olivia felt something settle in a place that she could not yet fully name, except to know that it changed the shape of every gentle thing he had ever quietly done for her, into something both more frightening and somehow, impossibly, more devastating to her heart than it had been 5 minutes earlier. Whatever kept this diner standing when everything around it fell, it had not started the night of the dare. It had started before she ever knew his name. For a while after that, strangely, it felt like relief. Whatever Gene was, whatever his world actually consisted of, it had apparently decided a long time ago, without asking her opinion on the matter, that her diner was not going to be touched. That felt against all reasonable logic like safety. Then, just as strangely, he stopped coming. Not all at once. First it was 2 days, which she told herself meant nothing. Then 4, then a full week, and Olivia caught herself doing the thing she'd sworn off doing 3 years ago in a room full of her own family, checking a door every time the bell rang, hoping and being disappointed over and over in a rhythm that felt humiliatingly familiar. She told herself it was fine. She told herself, several times a day, that a man like that disappearing was not a tragedy. It was simply the natural order of things reasserting itself, and that she had built an entire life without needing anyone's attention to feel complete, and she could certainly survive losing the attention of a man whose last name she still didn't actually know. She almost believed it by the end of the second week. What she did not know, because he had never once told her, was that Gene had made a deliberate, disciplined decision to stay away for reasons that had nothing to do with indifference and everything to do with the particular, ugly arithmetic of his world, where the people a dangerous man cared about were, without exception, the people other dangerous men learned to threaten first. He had convinced himself, in the specific, self-punishing way of a man who has spent 11 years believing that distance is the only form of protection he knows how to offer, that staying away was the kindest thing he had left to give her. He was wrong. He would not find out how wrong until it was almost too late to matter. On a Thursday night, close to closing, 2 men Olivia had never seen before walked into the diner, sat at the counter, and ordered nothing. They were pleasant. That was the worst part. One of them complimented the pie. The other one mentioned, almost as an aside, in the easy tone of a man discussing the weather, what a shame it would be if a place like this, family-run, no security, open all hours, ever had any trouble. Then they paid for 2 coffees they never drank, left a generous tip, and walked out into the rain without another word. Olivia stood behind the counter for a long time after the bell over the door stopped swinging, and for the first time since the night of the dare, she understood, all the way down in her stomach, that she was afraid. Gene heard about the 2 men at the diner within the hour. Old habits from the block's collection days meant somebody was still watching, even after Gene himself had stopped. He was standing in Dae-yoon's office before that hour was finished. "Your men were in her diner last night," Gene said. Dae-yoon did not deny it. He rarely bothered denying things that were, to his mind, already justified. "The waitress," he said. "End it." "There's nothing to end," Gene said, which they both understood to be a lie, and which Dae-yoon, out of something that might have almost been mercy, chose not to correct him on directly. "Your father," Dae-yoon said instead, quietly, "loved a man he should have killed a year before that man killed him. I pulled you out of that room, Gene. I built you back into someone nothing could get through. I am not going to sit here and watch you hand the same soft spot to a stranger with an apron, because I loved your father, and because I love you, and because if she is not handled, I will handle her myself, the way loose ends have always been handled in this family." He said it gently. That was the part that made it unbearable. He said it the way you'd tell someone the truth for their own good. And in his own mind, Dae-yoon believed completely and without a shred of doubt that this was exactly what it was. Gene went very still, the same stillness that had once made grown men reconsider entire sentences before finishing them. "You raised me," Gene said. "Everything I am, you built with your own hands, and I have never once in 11 years questioned a single thing you asked of me." Dae-yoon almost smiled, the way a man smiles when he believes he has already won. "But you don't get her," Gene said. "Not her name, not her address, not 1 hour of her life. If anything happens to that diner, if one man you have ever trained so much as stands outside it again, you will learn exactly how much of what you built into me was actually yours to control." By the end of that week, Dae-yoon had no title left inside the organization he had spent 30 years building. No protection. No name that opened doors that used to open the instant he approached them. Gene did not raise his voice once. Not through any of it. The same stillness the whole organization had learned to fear from him turned now, for the first time, on the one man who had taught him how to use it. It cost him the last living piece of his father he had left in this world. He made the choice anyway, and he made it before Olivia ever found out there had been a choice to make at all. It was raining again the night Gene walked back into that diner, 3 weeks after the last time, and this time, for the first time, his men did not wait by the door pretending to be furniture. They stood outside on the sidewalk, in plain sight, in the rain, the way men stand when they are not hiding what they're protecting anymore. Olivia saw him through the window before the bell even rang, and something in her chest did several complicated things at once, relief and anger and hope all arriving through the same door. "You don't get to disappear for 3 weeks, she started, and just, "I know," he said. That stopped her. He never simply agreed with her. He never explained himself either, not once in all the weeks she'd known him. "I stayed away because I convinced myself it was the only way to keep you safe," he said. "I was wrong. Staying away didn't protect you from anything. It just meant that when you actually needed protecting, I wasn't here." He told her, plainly, without performance, the way he did everything, what had almost happened, and what he had done to make sure it never would again, leaving out the parts that were not hers to carry, and keeping in the one part that mattered most. "I have spent 11 years making sure nothing I care about can be used against me," he said. "The only way I knew how to do that was to never let myself care about anything again. And then you set a coffee pot down in front of me and dared me to be a person, and I have not been able to stop being one since." The diner was empty except for the two of them and the sound of the rain, and for once in her life, Olivia Adu did not have a single clever thing to say back. So she didn't say anything. She crossed the space between the counter and the booth instead, and he stood to meet her halfway, and whatever happened next, the whole city would eventually understand, was the moment a man who had never once been claimed by anything decided, finally, to be claimed by her instead. Here is what became of them, in the years that followed, in the moments that mattered most. The first one is small, and it is theirs alone. On an ordinary Tuesday morning, 8 months later, Gene made her coffee exactly the way she liked it, and then, watching her over the rim of his own cup, made it wrong on purpose the next morning and the one after that because she had once complained, laughing, that his coffee was better than hers, and some competitive, tender part of him had decided he would rather be teased forever than let that stand. The second one arrived in an envelope on a Wednesday that started like every other Wednesday. Inside was a set of keys and an address 2 doors down from the diner, a space that had sat empty for years, now fitted with a kitchen, a dining room, and a sign in the window that had not been hung yet, waiting for her to choose the words. Every recipe in her grandmother's notebook had a home now. He had been building it quietly for months, without telling her a single thing about it, because he had learned, somewhere along the way, that the biggest things he could give her were the ones he didn't announce in advance. The third came a year after that, in the same diner booth where all of it had started, on a night when the rain was, almost suspiciously, exactly the same as it had been the first time. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He simply asked her to check her coffee before she drank it. And there, resting at the bottom of the cup, was a ring, and Olivia laughed so hard she cried, and then cried so hard she laughed again, and said yes before he'd technically finished asking. The fourth took her back to Kumasi, to a house that had been quietly renovated room by room, wired for lights that didn't flicker and pipes that didn't complain, and her mother walked through it with both hands pressed over her mouth, unable to find a single word in either of her languages big enough for what she was looking at. The fifth sat behind the host stand of the restaurant, framed in glass, her grandmother's notebook, tape and all, its cover too fragile now for daily use, her own name added beneath her grandmother's in matching ink, so that anyone who ate there could see exactly whose hands had built the menu, going back 2 generations. And the last one is the one that matters most, because it is the one that never ends. A Sunday morning, years down the road, the restaurant quiet before opening, the smell of jollof and garlic drifting through a kitchen where 2 languages overlapped without either one apologizing for the other. Gene, sleeves rolled up, being told, with great authority, by their daughter, that he was chopping the onions wrong. Olivia, watching both of them from the doorway, coffee in hand, thinking that if her 26-year-old self, gripping a coffee pot in a diner at 1 a.m, could see this exact moment, she would not have believed a single second of it. He looked up and caught her watching. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Some silences, it turns out, are not the kind you fill. They're the kind you finally get to keep. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. The most dangerous man in that city was never actually the danger in this story. Patience was. Hers for believing, quietly and against every warning her own history had given her, that she could be loved out loud instead of in spite of it. His for learning, slowly, the hardest way a man like him could learn anything, that the softest thing he ever did in his life turned out to be the strongest one too. Before you go, tell me in the comments what this one made you feel. Tell me who it made you think of. Tell me which moment between them stayed with you the longest, the coffee pot, the elbow, the ring at the bottom of the cup, whichever one found you. Somewhere in that restaurant tonight, there's an old coffee pot on a shelf behind the counter, chipped, completely out of use, and worth, to the two people who kept it, more than anything else in the building. Because the real ones, the kind of love that actually survives something, they never need the grand gesture to prove they made it. They just need you to still be standing there, coffee pot in hand, when it finally, quietly arrives. That's the whole story. This has been Afro Korean Stories Empire. And if there's one thing we know for certain around here, it's that love, the real kind, the kind that survives everything, is always worth the wait.